So Dave, this is a Ruger RPR that we kind of set up with a couple little custom things we put on it, including the Timney trigger for the Ruger RPR. And I like it. It's real crisp, it's flat, it was easy to install, but I thought you could kind of walk us through some of your trigger tips that you guys do here at FTW.
Yeah, great, let's do it. So once you get on the gun, we'll do a couple of dry fires, and let's see what the trigger feels like. Whether it's a new trigger or a new gun altogether, I mean, I want to knock out a couple of dry fires anyway, just to see how it is. Is it a heavy trigger? Is it light trigger?
Okay.
What do you think? You just give me a good trigger squeeze and tell me how many pounds this trigger is. Would you guess?
There's a take up to it.
It is, I see
and
that.
It hits a wall.
Good.
I would say it's maybe under 2 pounds.
Yeah. 2 pounds, right there at it.
Right
I thought
there.
the same, right when I was using it, but very crisp. I like the trigger. Okay, so you've got a good grip on the gun, and now with the trigger, that first digit of your finger I see is on there really good, just halfway in the middle.
Yeah.
You don't want to overdo it and have too much
that.
finger in, and you don't want to underdo it either. And sometimes that's a symptom of a gun's length of pull being too long or too short.
Okay.
Too short, a person's finger gets in there too much, and then if it's too long, like a young person, he can barely reach the trigger, so just the tip is touching.
So with like a gun like this, you could actually adjust the stock and make it where it's comfortable all the time.
If you need to, yeah. If you need to adjust the length of pull, it's very easy to do on this gun. But it fits you well, and your trigger placement, the placement of your trigger finger is just right.
Now what about this trigger is a flat trigger. I mean, do you tell people where up and down you like to see it?
Well, first of all, I'm gonna go where it's natural. One thing I don't wanna do is go too low, where you got the trigger guard and you got your finger dragging, too low. And it's just not natural to go too high either.
Okay.
You know? I mean, center trigger, center of that first pad, and then you're gonna be money.
Okay.
All right, and here's the whole idea. I need to be able to squeeze this trigger without influence the barrel at all, before the shot breaks.
Gotcha.
So people do it for different reasons, jerking the trigger, if they're flinching, if they've got a sensitivity to recoil, they might be too heavy on the trigger, and then of course that's gonna mess up their shot. Whatever you do in dry fire like that, which looked perfect, we need to do that, recreate it live fire as well.
And despite what people may think, even the most experienced shooters can start getting a weird trigger press sometimes.
They will.
Especially with a lot of shooting.
Whether it's rifle or pistol. Before I get on the gun and start going live, I do knock out several dry fires. On the pistol range, I do the same thing. Throughout the day, if I notice my groups are increasing in size, magazine out, couple of dry fires on a pistol, I'll notice a little bit of a dip, and I'm like, okay,
it happens to the best of us. Yeah.
I know better, and I fix it, and then I load up and I start going live again.
All right, cool.
All right, well, let's try to recreate this with a live fire. All right, so go ahead and load up a magazine.
All right.
Now, it's hard sometimes to see if a person is jerking the trigger during the live fire. I can watch you dry fire and see that you're doing it perfectly, but now that we've got a live round in, recoil happens, and sometimes it's a little difficult to see if the person's jerking. One thing a lot of us have done is you've pushed the magazine, you push the round down in the magazine and let the bolt come over. The magazine is a dry fire, but the person thinks it's a live fire. Everybody's seen this before, and it's like, they jerk.
The test.
It goes different ways with different people.
Yeah.
If I do it like that to my wife, she doesn't, think it's very comical, but I'm telling her, you're jerking the trigger. It's the only way I can make her believe.
Just trying to help you, babe.
So we'll see how you do. There's another way that I can assess if a person's jerking the trigger. As you fire, I want you to squeeze, 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 bang, right when it fires, just keep your finger to the rear. Ride the bull throughout recoil, okay? Head down looking through the scope. When it's time to reload, then release the trigger, run the bolt, and get ready again. If you're doing that, you're squeezing the trigger and it stays to the rear, your finger stays to the rear, throughout recoil, you're probably not jerking or flinching. But if you do this, bang, and your finger's flying off, we call it booger flicking. If you're a booger flicker, you're jerking the trigger.
So in shooting and in real life, booger flicking is bad.
True.
Words of wisdom here at FTW.
All right, so we've got a green target out there. He's at 200 yards. Tell you what, why don't I dial you up to a 0.4?
All right.
Okay, and let's see if we can hit that while we're working on some trigger control. Good, and I see you held the trigger well. Didn't see any tension in your shoulders or anything. Sometimes you'll see a person's shoulder like buck forward just before the shot. Yeah. Sometimes you'll see them jerk and booger flick the trigger. If you're really trying to assess a person, a lot of times, you got apps on your phone in slow-mo, Coach's Eye and things. I'll get right here and I'll film the person in slow motion as the triggers go, and then bang, and I'll rewind and I'll watch these little things people do. Sometimes right before the trigger is squeezed, it's like their eyes are closed and then they finish it, right? You'll see all sorts of things. You'll see the grip, you see the tendons in their hand, and you'll see these tendons start to tighten up. So they're tightening their grip just before they squeeze the trigger.
Okay, so a question along those lines. I feel like if you're gripping on this type of setup where we're prone, I'm not having to support the gun, your grip doesn't have to be real tight. And if it is tight, that's going to affect the trigger press, wouldn't it?
It will. I like to have a really tight grip because I like to do things consistent.
Okay.
And if I don't want to have a light grip here and then a heavier grip in another situation, I just keep a firm grip. So now if I'm on a rocky surface, some kind of an odd rest that I really need to maintain control of that rifle, I'm just doing it the same way every time. In my dry fire, this is my assessment of how tight I'm gripping the rifle. I grip it firm, I do a dry fire, and I watch my reticle. A lot of times you'll see just with the firing pin coming forward, you'll see your reticle shake some. If you just increase the tension, a little bit heavier grip, a little bit stronger grip, and then try another dry fire and another dry fire, you'll find the sweet spot where all of that goes away.
Okay, so, even the firing pin going
just
won't,
that mechanical
won't upset the
movement.
reticle.
Right.
You got a good handle on it.
Yep. I didn't notice it with this gun. It's a pretty heavy system, right?
Yeah.
And it's in a prone position, and I didn't notice it. I held a really loose grip. I saw no movement at all. But some of our really lightweight hunting rifles, bigger calibers, bigger firing pins, just that mechanical firing pin coming forward is shaking the round, or shaking the rifle. So you want to hold a little firmer grip on those.
All right. And try another one?
Yeah, let's do it. So, any questions, on the trigger?
No, it makes sense. I've said it before, and probably people watching have heard me say it before. For those of us that shoot a lot of pistols, a lot of ARs, short range, or even shotguns, sometimes I do want to take my finger off the trigger real quick. And when I get into this type of shooting, I have to remind myself to slow down a little bit.
Sure. There's a tip on your ARs as well, and you'll hear that mechanical click on an AR. You'll squeeze the trigger, and then when it fires, bang, keep the trigger depressed throughout recoil, back on target, and listen for that tick. It's going to tick and reset it, and you'll know you're doing it right.
Cool. All right. Trigger tips, Dave with FTW. Work on this because trigger control ultimately is one of the most important things you can do to hit your target.
Yeah.